Willow Creek, Vermont, was a picture-perfect town nestled in the heart of New England, a place where everyone knew each other and gossip spread as fast as the fall leaves turned. But on July 10, 2023, the town's peace was shattered when Laura Collins, a hard-working mother of two, returned to her cozy suburban home to find her daughter's lifeless body sprawled across the bedroom floor. Emma Collins, just 21 years old, was the vibrant girl next door who had brought light to the lives of those around her. But on this fateful summer afternoon, the brightness she carried was extinguished in the most brutal of ways. The room bore the marks of a desperate struggle. The curtains were torn, furniture overturned, and a shattered photo frame lay on the floor. It was a haunting scene. The photograph in the broken frame was of Emma and her neighbor, Matthew Anderson, whose charming smile now seemed to conceal something far more sinister. Laura's screams echoed through the quiet neighborhood, drawing the attention of their closest neighbors. Within minutes, the flashing lights of police cruisers painted the idyllic streets with an ominous hue. Detective Samantha Monroe, known for her sharp instincts and unrelenting dedication, arrived on the scene. She was greeted by the chaos of an active crime scene, officers cordoning off the area, neighbors whispering in hushed tones, and Laura, pale and trembling, being consoled by her husband, Martin Collins. The evidence in the room was chilling. The bruises around Emma's neck told a grim story of strangulation, while her wide, terror-stricken eyes silently recounted her final moments of desperation. On a nearby nightstand, a glass of water sat shattered, its fragments glittering under the harsh artificial lights. On these shards, the faint fingerprints of Matthew Anderson would later emerge as a critical clue. Yet, despite the chaos within, there was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had entered Emma's sanctuary had been someone she trusted, someone she let in willingly. The Collins family was a cornerstone of Willow Creek's community. Martin, a quiet but diligent man, worked tirelessly to provide for his family. Laura, balancing part-time work and household responsibilities, had a warm smile for everyone she met. But it was Emma who stood out, young, driven, and full of life. She had returned home just a year ago, uncertain about her next steps but optimistic about her future. That optimism, however, was tinged with a longing for stability and love, a need that had entangled her in a secret and increasingly volatile relationship. Matthew Anderson was not just anyone in Willow Creek. At 30, he was the golden boy of the community. Charismatic and ambitious, he had built a successful career in real estate and was known for his confident demeanor. The Anderson family, with their sprawling colonial-style home near the town center, was one of the most respected in Willow Creek. Matthew's parents, Margaret and Richard Anderson, had raised their son to embody the values of success and propriety. But beneath Matthew's polished exterior was a man whose secrets were as tightly guarded as his reputation. As Detective Monroe surveyed the scene, her keen eyes caught details others might overlook. A crumpled piece of paper peeking out from under Emma's bed caught her attention. It was a handwritten letter, the ink smeared from what appeared to be tear stains. In it, Emma wrote about the weight of a secret she could no longer bear, a truth that she intended to reveal to her family soon. Monroe folded the letter carefully, her mind already racing through possibilities. By evening, whispers began to circulate about Emma's connection to Matthew. The neighbors, who had seen the two exchange friendly waves across their adjacent yards, never suspected anything more. Yet, as Monroe dug deeper into Emma's life, she discovered text messages on Emma's phone, messages filled with emotion, frustration, and desperation. Emma had wanted to bring their relationship into the open, but Matthew had vehemently resisted, fearing the fallout for both of their families. As the sun set on Willow Creek, the police investigation was in full swing. Monroe ordered a thorough search of Emma's phone records, spoke with neighbors, and instructed her team to review surveillance footage from nearby streets. A neighbor claimed to have seen Matthew's car parked outside the Collins residence earlier that afternoon. Another mentioned hearing raised voices coming from Emma's room around 2:30 p.m., followed by an eerie silence. Despite the mounting tension, Monroe's instincts told her there was more to this story. Matthew Anderson, with his carefully curated image of perfection, became her primary suspect. But there were gaps, pieces of the puzzle that didn't yet fit. A neighbor reported seeing an unfamiliar car parked near the Collins home just after Matthew was said to have left. The timeline was murky, and Monroe knew that unraveling the truth would require patience and precision. As she left the Collins home that night, Detective Monroe's thoughts lingered on Emma's letter. What was the secret she had intended to reveal? And more importantly, who would have gone to such lengths to ensure she never got the chance? In the quiet darkness of Willow Creek, a storm was brewing, one that would bring buried secrets to light and force the town to confront the shadows lurking within its seemingly perfect community. Willow Creek had always prided itself on being a tightly knit community, where neighbors looked out for one another and families came together for Sunday potlucks at the town hall. Yet, beneath its picturesque charm, some relationships held layers of tension that no one dared to discuss. The tragedy of Emma Collins's death peeled back these hidden truths, revealing a web of complicated dynamics that went far beyond what the surface suggested. Emma Collins had always been the star of her family, at least in the eyes of those who didn't know her intimately. With her auburn hair and radiant smile, she carried a natural warmth that drew people in. But those closest to Emma understood that her confidence was fragile, a facade masking insecurities that had lingered since childhood. Growing up, she had lived in the shadow of her older sister, Caroline, who had been everything Emma was not: disciplined, focused, and perfectly aligned with the expectations of their parents. When Caroline married Daniel Collins, a man known for his overbearing demeanor, Emma was left grappling with feelings of inadequacy. Emma's relationship with her parents reflected the unspoken pressures within the Collins household. Martin Collins, her father, was a quiet, hardworking man who rarely expressed his emotions. His reserved nature often left Emma yearning for approval she never received. Laura Collins, Emma's mother, was loving but overwhelmed by the demands of managing the family's finances and maintaining a semblance of normalcy. Emma's return home after college, uncertain about her future, added another layer of tension to the household. Laura worried endlessly about Emma's lack of direction, while Martin quietly hoped his youngest daughter would eventually get her act together. Amid this backdrop, Emma found herself drawn to Matthew Anderson. Matthew was everything she believed she needed: confident, successful, and exuding the charm of someone who always seemed in control. At 30 years old, Matthew was well respected in Willow Creek, known for his success in real estate and his reputation as a reliable pillar of the community. He was the kind of man who could command attention with just a smile, and his ability to navigate social settings effortlessly was something Emma admired deeply. Yet, few knew the pressure that came with being the Anderson family's golden boy. Margaret Anderson, Matthew's mother, had meticulously groomed her son to embody the family's values of excellence and propriety. A woman of strict discipline and high expectations, Margaret saw Matthew not just as her son but as the standard-bearer of the Anderson legacy. His father, Richard Anderson, was a man of few words but carried an unyielding authority that Matthew had learned to obey from a young age. Between the two, Matthew had grown up internalizing the belief that maintaining appearances was paramount, even if it meant burying his true feelings. The Anderson family home, a stately colonial-style house near Willow Creek Center, symbolized their prominence in the town. To the outside world, the Andersons were a model family. But Matthew carried the weight of their expectations like a hidden scar. His desire to preserve his pristine image often clashed with his deeper need for connection, a conflict that had led him into the arms of Emma Collins. Their relationship had begun innocently enough. Living next door to one another, Emma and Matthew frequently crossed paths. Casual waves turned into friendly conversations, which soon deepened into something far more intimate. For Emma, the relationship was electrifying, a stark contrast to the monotony of her life at home. Matthew represented escape, excitement, and the validation she had always craved. But as their affair grew, so did the stakes. Matthew, despite his outward charm, was a man deeply afraid of vulnerability. While he was drawn to Emma's free-spirited nature, he also found her emotional intensity overwhelming. She wanted more than clandestine dinners and stolen moments, she wanted to be acknowledged as someone important in his life. For Emma, keeping their relationship a secret was a betrayal. For Matthew, it was a necessity. He feared that the truth about their relationship would not only destroy his carefully cultivated reputation but also ripple through both their families, leaving irreparable damage in its wake. Adding to this volatile mix was Daniel Collins, Emma's brother-in-law. Daniel was a man of rigid beliefs and an overprotective streak that often bordered on obsessive. Having married Caroline, Emma's older sister, Daniel had inserted himself into every facet of the Collins family dynamic. His concern for Emma often felt more like control, and he made no secret of his disdain for the decisions she made. Emma had confided in a close friend that Daniel's interference in her life was suffocating, but she lacked the courage to confront him directly. Unknown to many, Daniel had started to grow suspicious of Emma's connection with Matthew. His observations of their subtle interactions, the lingering glances, the private conversations, fed into his growing unease. To Daniel, the idea of Emma being involved with a man like Matthew was not just inappropriate but dangerous. Whether his protectiveness stemmed from genuine concern or a need to dominate was a question that even those closest to him couldn't answer. Detective Samantha Monroe, meanwhile, was beginning to piece together the complex relationships surrounding Emma's life. As someone who had once endured an emotionally manipulative relationship herself, Samantha recognized the signs of control and secrecy. She noted how both Matthew and Daniel seemed to orbit Emma, each exerting influence over her in different but equally suffocating ways. To Samantha, the dynamics within the Collins and Anderson families hinted at a deeper dysfunction, one that could very well have played a role in Emma's tragic fate. In the days following Emma's death, Monroe's investigation revealed a series of text messages between Emma and Matthew. Emma's frustration was palpable in her words. "I can't keep doing this," one message read. "I deserve more than being a secret." Matthew's replies were short and dismissive, with one chilling response: "We'll talk when I'm ready, not when you push me." These exchanges painted a picture of a relationship teetering on the edge, driven by Emma's need for validation and Matthew's fear of exposure. As the pieces of Emma's life began to come together, it became clear that the relationships she navigated were far from simple. Between her longing for love, the pressures of family, and the hidden tensions with Matthew and Daniel, Emma's world was a fragile web of emotions and expectations. It was a web that had finally collapsed, leaving behind a tragic void that Detective Monroe was determined to fill with the truth. The evening of July 5, 2023, began like any other in Willow Creek. Families gathered for dinner, children played in their yards, and the town settled into its post-holiday lull after the excitement of the 4th of July celebrations. But for Emma Collins and Matthew Anderson, it marked the beginning of the end. The argument that erupted between them at the Greenfield Tavern, a beloved local restaurant, would send shockwaves through their lives and the lives of those around them. Emma had chosen the public venue deliberately. She was tired of hiding, tired of stolen moments and whispered conversations. She believed that being in a crowded space would force Matthew to listen, to confront the truth she had been carrying for months. She arrived early, her heart racing with anticipation and dread. The tavern, with its rustic decor and familiar faces, offered little comfort as she clutched the folded napkin in her lap, rehearsing what she would say. Matthew arrived 15 minutes late, his usual composed demeanor slightly frayed. He had spent the day juggling work commitments and deflecting his mother Margaret's probing questions about his personal life. Seeing Emma sitting alone at a corner table, her expression a mix of determination and vulnerability, filled him with a sinking sense of foreboding. He knew this wasn't just another stolen evening together, this was a confrontation he had tried desperately to avoid. As soon as he sat down, Emma wasted no time. "We need to talk," she began, her voice steady but her hands trembling. Matthew's shoulders stiffened, his eyes darting briefly around the room. A few regular patrons glanced in their direction, curiosity flickering across their faces before returning to their meals. "We are talking," Matthew replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What's on your mind?" Emma leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I can't keep living like this, Matthew. Sneaking around, pretending we don't matter to each other. It's not fair, to me, to you, to anyone." Matthew sighed, leaning back in his chair. He glanced around again, his discomfort palpable. "Emma, we've talked about this. It's complicated. Our families, this town, they wouldn't understand." "They don't have to understand," Emma countered, her voice rising slightly. "They just need to know. I'm not asking for a parade, Matthew. I'm asking for honesty. For respect." The sharp edge in her words cut through Matthew's defenses, and his frustration boiled over. "Respect?" he hissed, his tone low but cold. "Do you have any idea what you're asking me to do? You're asking me to throw away everything I've worked for, my reputation, my family's trust, for what? To make you feel validated?" Emma's cheeks flushed with anger and hurt. "This isn't just about me, Matthew. This is about us. Or is there no us unless it's convenient for you?" Their voices, though hushed, carried enough weight to catch the attention of nearby diners. One or two heads turned subtly, their curiosity piqued. Emma, acutely aware of the growing audience, leaned back, crossing her arms. "You're ashamed of me," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "You don't care about us. You only care about what other people think." "That's not true," Matthew snapped, leaning forward. "I'm trying to protect us, protect you. Do you know what people will say? What my mother will say? This isn't just about love, Emma. It's about survival." "Survival?" Emma's voice rose, louder than she intended. "Is that what this is to you? A game of appearances? Well, I'm done hiding. Either we're real, or we're nothing." Matthew froze, his expression hardening. The words hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of Emma's ultimatum pressing down on them both. Finally, Matthew stood abruptly, tossing a few bills on the table. "I need to think," he muttered, his voice low and strained. "We'll talk later." Emma stared after him as he stormed out of the tavern, her chest tightening with a mix of anger and despair. She could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her, their whispered speculations buzzing like static. Blinking back tears, she grabbed her purse and hurried out, leaving behind the remains of what should have been a quiet evening. The fallout from their argument rippled through the days that followed. Emma's texts to Matthew became increasingly desperate, her words tinged with hurt and longing. "You can't just walk away from this," she wrote. "You owe me more than silence." Matthew's responses were sparse, curt. "I need time," he wrote in one message. In another, "We'll figure this out, but not like this." On the morning of July 10th, Emma sent one final message. "I can't keep doing this," she wrote. "If you won't tell them, I will." It was a declaration of defiance, an ultimatum that left Matthew reeling. He had tried to compartmentalize the situation, to keep his life with Emma separate from the world he had so carefully constructed. But her words shattered that illusion. The walls he had built were crumbling, and he could feel the weight of his choices bearing down on him. That afternoon, Matthew drove to the Collins home. He told himself he was going to reason with her, to find a way to de-escalate the situation. But as he parked his car in the familiar driveway, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Inside, Emma was waiting, her heart heavy with a mix of hope and anger, unaware that the confrontation to come would spiral far beyond what either of them anticipated. Detective Samantha Monroe stood in the center of Emma Collins's disheveled bedroom, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. The broken frame on the floor, the overturned chair, the torn curtains, all signs of a desperate struggle. But there was more to this room than chaos. Every item told a story, and Monroe was determined to read between the lines. Emma's lifeless body had already been taken away, but her presence lingered in the air. The bruises on her neck, the terror etched into her wide-open eyes, Monroe could see it all in her mind's eye. This wasn't a random act of violence. Whoever had done this knew Emma well, and Monroe's job was to find out who and why. Her first discovery came from the nightstand. A shattered glass lay among its fragments, sparkling under the forensic team's lights. She crouched down, carefully examining the shards. "Dust for prints," she ordered, her voice steady but firm. Moments later, the technician nodded. "We've got fingerprints," he confirmed. "Clear ones." Monroe's gut told her who they belonged to even before the tests came back: Matthew Anderson. The neighbors had been quick to mention his name when questioned. Several saw his car parked outside the Collins home earlier that day, and one had even reported hearing raised voices around 2:30 p.m., just before everything went quiet. Another neighbor mentioned seeing an unfamiliar car parked nearby, adding an air of intrigue to what was already a convoluted case. As Monroe delved deeper, Emma's phone proved to be a goldmine of information. The text exchanges between Emma and Matthew in the days leading up to her death painted a vivid picture of their unraveling relationship. Emma's messages were emotional, pleading, and increasingly frustrated. "I deserve more than being a secret," one read. Another, more haunting, said, "If you won't tell them, I will." Matthew's responses were short, dismissive, and growing colder. One particularly chilling message caught Monroe's attention: "We'll talk when I'm ready, not when you force me." The texts confirmed what Monroe already suspected: their relationship was at a breaking point. But what intrigued her more was a handwritten letter found crumpled under Emma's bed. The letter, written in Emma's familiar scrawl, mentioned a truth she planned to reveal to her family. The words were smeared, likely by tears, making parts of it illegible. But what Monroe could decipher spoke volumes: "I can't carry this alone anymore. They need to know the truth. It's not just about me. It's about..." The sentence ended abruptly, leaving Monroe to wonder what Emma had been trying to say. The Anderson family, meanwhile, was quick to close ranks. Margaret Anderson, Matthew's mother, was stoic during questioning, brushing off any suggestion that her son could be involved in something so scandalous. "Matthew has always been a pillar of this community," she said, her tone icy. Whatever relationship he had with Emma, it was surely innocent. "This town loves to gossip." Richard Anderson, Matthew's father, was less forthcoming. A man of few words, his silence spoke volumes. When asked about Matthew's whereabouts on the afternoon of July 10, he hesitated before offering a vague response. "He was working, as far as I know," Richard mumbled, avoiding Monroe's piercing gaze. Matthew himself was cooperative but guarded when brought in for questioning. His calm demeanor raised immediate red flags for Monroe. "I didn't do anything to hurt Emma," he insisted, his voice steady but emotionless. "Yes, I was there that afternoon, but we just talked. She was upset, and I left. That's all." But Monroe wasn't convinced. The timeline didn't add up. Surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store showed Matthew buying cigarettes shortly after 3 p.m., mere minutes after Emma was likely killed. When confronted with this evidence, Matthew faltered. "I needed to clear my head," he stammered, his composure cracking. Look, I didn't hurt her, okay?" Monroe's instincts told her there was more to the story. But Matthew wasn't the only person of interest. As she expanded her investigation, another name emerged: Daniel Collins, Emma's brother-in-law. Daniel had always been protective of Emma, some might say excessively so. He had a reputation for being controlling, and his strained relationship with Emma was no secret among their family. One of Emma's close friends revealed a startling detail during her interview. Emma told me Daniel didn't like her spending time with Matthew, the friend said, wringing her hands nervously. She said he thought it was inappropriate, that it would bring shame to the family. Monroe decided to question Daniel directly. He admitted to being near the Collins home on the day of the murder but claimed he was there to check on Emma. "She's like a sister to me," he said, his tone defensive. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay. She'd been acting strange lately." "Strange how?" Monroe pressed him, but Daniel offered no specifics. Instead, he deflected, shifting the focus back to Matthew. "You should be looking at him," Daniel said, his eyes narrowing. "He's the one who's been sneaking around with Emma, not me." As the days passed, the case became a labyrinth of conflicting stories and mounting evidence. The fingerprints on the glass confirmed Matthew's presence at the scene, but the sighting of the unfamiliar car and Daniel's suspicious behavior left Monroe grappling with multiple possibilities. Was this a crime of passion, committed in a moment of rage by Matthew? Or was there more to Daniel's involvement than he was letting on? Emma's letter and the cryptic messages it contained remained at the forefront of Monroe's mind. Whatever secret Emma had been planning to reveal, it was powerful enough to cost her life. And as Monroe pieced together the fragments of Emma's world, she knew that the truth was buried somewhere in the shadows of Willow Creek, hidden behind the polished facades of its most respected families. The clock was ticking, and Monroe's instincts told her that the killer was closer than anyone realized. All she needed was one slip, one misstep, to crack the case wide open. As the investigation deepened, Detective Samantha Monroe felt the weight of the case pressing down on her. The pieces of the puzzle didn't quite fit, leaving gaps that only seemed to grow with every new lead. Emma's murder wasn't a simple crime of passion, it was a boiling pot of hidden motives, fractured relationships, and buried secrets. And as the days wore on, the calm facade of Willow Creek began to crack. The first major breakthrough came unexpectedly. Monroe had ordered a deeper dive into Emma Collins's recent communications and interactions. What surfaced was startling: a series of emails sent between Emma and Daniel Collins, her brother-in-law, in the weeks leading up to her death. The emails revealed a tense and contentious relationship. In one, Daniel chastised Emma for her reckless behavior, warning her that her actions could tear this family apart. In another, Emma fired back, accusing Daniel of overstepping his bounds. "I'm not your responsibility, Daniel," she wrote. "I won't let you control my life." Monroe's instincts kicked into high gear. Daniel's protective behavior, which had initially seemed like concern, now reeked of something more sinister. The emails painted a picture of a man who was not only controlling but also deeply invested in Emma's choices, far beyond what was typical for a brother-in-law. Monroe decided it was time to bring Daniel in for a more intensive round of questioning. Sitting across from her in the dimly lit interrogation room, Daniel appeared calm, almost too composed. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlocked, as he answered Monroe's questions with practiced ease. But the cracks in his demeanor began to show when Monroe mentioned the emails. "Daniel," she began, sliding a printed copy of one particularly heated exchange across the table. "You had quite a lot to say to Emma in these messages. Care to explain what you meant by tearing the family apart?" Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with an emotion he quickly suppressed. "Emma was impulsive," he said after a long pause. "She didn't always think things through. I was just trying to protect her, and the family, from making a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Monroe pressed, her gaze unyielding. Was it her relationship with Matthew Anderson? Or was it something else? Daniel hesitated, his composure slipping further. "She was planning to go public with that situation," he said, his tone laced with disdain. "I told her it was a bad idea, that it would cause nothing but trouble. For her. For us." Monroe leaned forward. "And how did she respond to your advice?" "She didn't listen," Daniel snapped, his voice rising. "Emma never listened. The tension in the room was palpable. Monroe could sense the frustration bubbling just beneath Daniel's surface. But before she could push further, her phone buzzed on the table. A text from her team: "We've got something. Come back to the scene." Back at the Collins home, the forensic team had uncovered a critical piece of evidence, a partial print on the broken photo frame. It didn't belong to Matthew, as Monroe had initially suspected, but to Daniel. The discovery sent shockwaves through Monroe's theory of the case. Had Daniel confronted Emma that day, perhaps in an attempt to stop her from exposing the truth? And if so, what was the truth she was so desperate to reveal? The next twist came from an unlikely source. A neighbor, hesitant to speak earlier, finally came forward with a new piece of information. On the day of the murder, she had seen a car she didn't recognize parked outside the Collins home. But it wasn't Daniel's car, it belonged to Rebecca, Matthew's ex-girlfriend. Monroe's head spun with questions. Why would Rebecca be at the scene of the crime? What connection did she have to Emma? Tracking Rebecca down, Monroe uncovered yet another layer of the tangled web. Rebecca admitted to being in town that day but denied going to the Collins home. "I came to confront Matthew," she confessed. "I'd heard rumors about him and Emma, and I wanted answers. But when I couldn't find him, I left." Rebecca's alibi was shaky at best, but Monroe couldn't ignore the timing. As she pieced together the timeline, it became increasingly clear that multiple people had motives to confront Emma, and at least two of them had been near the Collins home that day. Monroe's investigation now centered on two pressing questions. Was Daniel's overbearing behavior rooted in something darker, perhaps jealousy or even obsession? And had Rebecca's unresolved anger toward Matthew driven her to confront Emma in a moment of irrational rage? The case reached a boiling point when a new piece of evidence emerged from Emma's room, a hidden thumb drive tucked inside a jewelry box. On it were encrypted files, which the forensic team painstakingly unlocked. What they revealed was a bombshell, a series of journal entries and audio recordings made by Emma, chronicling her relationship with Matthew and the escalating tensions with Daniel. In one chilling recording, Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. "Daniel thinks he can control me," she said. "He keeps telling me what I can and can't do, who I can and can't see. It's suffocating. But I'm done being afraid. I'm going to tell my parents everything." Another recording, made just days before her death, hinted at Rebecca's involvement. "Rebecca called me today," Emma said. "She sounded angry, accusing me of ruining Matthew's life. I don't know how she found out, but I can't deal with her on top of everything else." The recordings painted a harrowing picture of Emma's final days, a young woman caught in a web of manipulation, fear, and desperation. Monroe's mind raced as she tried to connect the dots. Both Daniel and Rebecca had motives. Both had been near the scene. But only one had left a mark on the shattered frame in Emma's room. Monroe knew she was close. The evidence was mounting, the lies unraveling. All she needed now was one final push, one moment of weakness, to crack the case wide open. And as the storm of suspicion swirled around Willow Creek, Monroe was prepared to confront its darkest truths, no matter where they led. The storm clouds over Willow Creek mirrored the brewing tension in Detective Samantha Monroe's investigation. With each passing day, the threads of Emma Collins's life unraveled, exposing the tangled relationships and secrets that had led to her tragic death. Now, with mounting evidence and two suspects, Daniel Collins and Rebecca, Monroe felt the resolution was close, but the truth still eluded her. The key break came during a re-examination of the partial fingerprint found on the broken photo frame in Emma's bedroom. While Daniel's print had been identified earlier, forensic analysis revealed something new, a smudge overlaying his print that matched Matthew Anderson. This finding placed both men at the scene of the crime, further complicating an already convoluted timeline. Monroe decided it was time to confront Matthew again. He had been cooperative but distant throughout the investigation, his calm demeanor unshaken despite the growing suspicion around him. Sitting across from him in the interrogation room, Monroe leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "Matthew," she began, her voice steady, "you told us you left Emma's house after your argument. But the evidence says otherwise. Your fingerprint is on a photo frame that was broken during a violent struggle. Care to explain that?" Matthew's composure wavered for the first time. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the one-way mirror behind Monroe. I went back," he admitted finally, his voice low. "I thought we could talk it through, calm things down." Monroe pressed him. "And what happened when you went back? Did you and Emma fight again?" Matthew exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. "She was upset. She said she was going to tell everyone about us, that she couldn't keep living a lie. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. She started yelling, and I grabbed her. Just to stop her from screaming." He paused, his hands trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I swear, I didn't." The room fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging heavy in the air. Monroe studied him carefully. His words aligned with the evidence, the broken frame, the bruises on Emma's neck, but something still felt off. "What happened next, Matthew?" she asked, her tone unwavering. "I panicked," Matthew continued, his voice breaking. "I left. I didn't know what else to do. But I swear, when I left, she was alive." It wasn't the full story, Monroe knew. The timeline was still murky, and there were too many loose ends. She decided to shift her focus to Daniel Collins, whose behavior had raised red flags from the beginning. The discovery of his fingerprints at the scene couldn't be ignored, and his controlling relationship with Emma added to the mounting suspicion. When confronted with the evidence, Daniel's reaction was explosive. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, slamming his fists on the table. "I didn't kill her. I was trying to protect her from Matthew." Monroe didn't flinch. "Protect her from what, Daniel? Her choices? Her independence? Or was it something else?" Daniel's face darkened, his anger boiling over. "She didn't know what she was doing," he spat. "That man was going to ruin her life, ruin our family. I went there to stop her from making a mistake. But when I got there," his voice trailed off, his expression hardening. "She was already gone." The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the room. Monroe pressed him further, and Daniel admitted to arriving at the Collins home shortly after Matthew had left. When he found Emma's lifeless body, he panicked, fearing he would be blamed. In his desperation, he had staged the scene, breaking the photo frame and wiping surfaces clean to obscure his presence. Monroe's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments. Matthew had been the last person to see Emma alive, but Daniel's interference complicated the narrative. Still, one question lingered: where did Rebecca fit into all of this? The answer came unexpectedly when a team member uncovered surveillance footage from a gas station near the Collins home. Rebecca's car was seen pulling out of the neighborhood around the time of the murder. When confronted, Rebecca broke down, her confession tumbling out in jagged pieces. "I went to confront Emma," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I thought she was trying to destroy Matthew's life, and I lost control. I grabbed her, and she fought back. I didn't mean to hurt her, but she fell, and," her sobs choked the rest of her sentence. Rebecca's confession was the missing piece. Emma's death wasn't premeditated, but the result of a tragic confrontation fueled by jealousy, desperation, and fear. Rebecca had fled the scene in panic, unaware that Daniel would later arrive and unwittingly complicate the crime. With Rebecca's confession, the case reached its grim conclusion. She was charged with manslaughter, while Daniel faced charges for obstruction of justice. Matthew, despite his emotional manipulation of Emma, avoided legal repercussions but would forever live under the weight of his choices. For the Collins family, the loss of Emma left a void that could never be filled. Laura and Martin struggled to reconcile their grief with the revelations about their daughter's hidden struggles. Willow Creek, once a town of whispered gossip and friendly facades, now bore the scars of its darkest hour. Detective Monroe closed her notebook, exhaustion etched into her features. The case had been solved, but the emotional toll lingered. She had uncovered the truth, but it was a truth steeped in tragedy, a young life lost, families fractured, and a town forever changed. As Monroe drove away from Willow Creek, the rain began to fall, washing over the quiet streets. The storm had passed, but its aftermath would remain, a stark reminder of the secrets that had lurked just beneath the surface. In the end, the truth had come to light, but at a price no one could ever forget. Willow Creek was no longer the serene, picturesque town it once was. The truth surrounding Emma Collins's death had pierced through its carefully maintained veneer, leaving a wound that would take years to heal. For the residents, the events of that fateful summer served as a grim reminder that even in the closest communities, darkness could lurk in the most unexpected places. Detective Samantha Monroe sat alone in her car, parked on the outskirts of town, the rain tapping softly against the windshield. The case had been closed, the paperwork filed, and justice served, or at least as much justice as the law could provide. Yet, the conclusion brought her no comfort. It was a hollow victory, one that left her grappling with more questions than answers. Rebecca's confession had tied the loose threads together, revealing a tragic chain of events that spiraled out of control. Her jealousy and anger, fueled by a lingering obsession with Matthew and a misguided sense of loyalty, had pushed her to confront Emma. The confrontation had turned physical, and in a moment of rage, Rebecca had unintentionally taken Emma's life. Her regret was palpable, but it could never undo the harm she had caused. Daniel Collins's involvement, though less direct, added another layer of complexity to the tragedy. His need for control and his misguided attempt to protect Emma had led him to tamper with the crime scene, unwittingly complicating the investigation. While his intentions may not have been malicious, they were rooted in a possessiveness that ultimately contributed to the chaos. And then there was Matthew Anderson. His role in Emma's life, and in her death, remained a point of quiet contention. While he hadn't directly harmed her, his emotional detachment and unwillingness to acknowledge their relationship had played a significant part in Emma's despair. He had walked away from the ordeal without criminal charges, but his reputation was irreparably tarnished. Matthew's polished image had cracked, revealing a man who had prioritized his own comfort over the well-being of someone who had loved him deeply. The Collins family, once seen as the embodiment of small-town resilience, was shattered. Martin and Laura Collins faced the unimaginable task of rebuilding their lives after losing their youngest daughter. The scars left by Daniel's actions lingered, creating a rift that threatened to tear the family apart. For them, the tragedy was a cruel lesson in the consequences of unspoken truths and unchecked control. As Monroe reflected on the case, she couldn't shake the feeling that it could have been prevented. Emma's life had been a delicate balance of longing, love, and fear, factors that had converged in the worst possible way. Monroe had seen this pattern before, both in her work and in her own life. People trapped in toxic relationships, unable to escape the pull of emotions they couldn't control, often found themselves at the mercy of those around them. She thought back to Emma's recordings, her voice trembling with a mix of courage and fear. "I'm done being afraid," Emma had said in one of her final entries. Those words stayed with Monroe, a haunting echo of a young woman who had tried to reclaim her life but had run out of time. As Monroe started her car and pulled away, the rain began to subside, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the soft glow of streetlights. Willow Creek would move on, as all towns eventually did, but the memory of Emma Collins would linger. For Monroe, the case was a reminder of the fragility of human connections and the devastating consequences of broken trust. As the screen fades to black, the following text appears, accompanied by a somber melody. What are your thoughts on the choices made by each character in this story? Could things have turned out differently if they had acted otherwise? Do you think Matthew, Rebecca, or Daniel deserved harsher consequences for their actions? Why or why not? What lessons can we learn from Emma's story about love, control, and the dangers of keeping secrets? Have you ever encountered situations where unspoken truths caused harm? How did you handle it? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your opinions and perspectives in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about how we can recognize the signs of toxic relationships and foster understanding in our communities. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to stay updated on more stories that uncover the shadows beneath everyday lives.